KBC Channel 1 inakupa fursa ya kutizama mbashara kipute hicho kutoka Qatar nyumbani kwako. Runinga ya KBC Channel 1 inakukaribisha kwenye kipindi cha Dunda Dunda Qatar.
Nakwambia kwamba baba, alama ya reli ni Dunda Dunda Qatar.
Na tunakuja nyumbani pale mtaani pale ambapo upo wewe mwenyewe.
Huku ukijishindia zawadi chungu nzima.
Hapa kumejaa vitu kocho kocho.
Jongea. Shabiki kwenye Dunda Dunda Qatar.
Ukitazama unashinda.
KBC Channel 1, wenzio wa dhati michezoni.
Good morning and welcome to News Check right here on KBC Channel 1. There's so much to speak about, including what is happening in the country. This coming Thursday, the Justice and Legal Affairs Committee is expected to start listening to 3 petitions filed in Parliament seeking the removal of the Cherera 4. You're talking about Juliana Cherera, the IEBC Vice Chairperson, Irene Masita, Commissioner of the IEBC, Justice Nyang'aya, and Francis Wanderi, all 4 commissioners of the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission. These 3 petitions seek to remove them because of gross misconduct and incompetence. But then again, will the committee be able to sustain that charge or agree with the petitioners? That begins this coming Thursday. Of course, there's a conversation on the importation of GMO maize into the country and whether there are risks or none. And that conversation we'll be having today. And of course, also a reaction from the members of parliament in terms of the elections they did last week on Thursday, the election of members to the East African Legislative Assembly. We saw a coalescing of members of parliament from Mount Kenya to save some of their own, if you were to say so. And that conversation will also be having. I expect, of course, in studio to be hosting Jane Kagiri, the member of parliament for Laikipia. But in studio, one of the members of parliament was already arrived is Abdul Haro Kore, the member of parliament for Mandera South. We also expect Hussein Bare, the member of parliament for Tarbaj, and Jane Kagiri, the member of parliament for Laikipia. My name is John Jacob Curia. Welcome to the broadcasting day. This is News Check. And remember, World Cup Eco KBC will be showing you sporting action. We started on Sunday, and every single day is a match day, and we'll be showing you these matches live on KBC Channel 1. But first things first, Mheshimiwa Abdul, karibu sana.
Asante sana.
How are you doing?
Fine, thank you. It's a pleasure to be on your studio again. Nashukuru.
Karibu sana.
Asante.
You're welcome. Of course, a member of parliament elected on a UDM ticket in Mandera County. Let's just have a look a little bit on the elections that members of parliament did last Thursday. He spent the entire day electing members to this very critical parliament, the East African Legislative Assembly. What do you think about the outcome in terms of the 4 members from Azimio and the 5 from Kenya Kwanza, your coalition?
Thank you very much. I think that election was very good. It went on very well. And at the end of the day, I congratulate all the 9 members who were able to clinch those 9 coveted positions to represent Kenya in the East Africa Legislative Assembly. Those members came to the chambers, their names came to the chambers as candidates. But after the elections, they are now representatives of Kenya. They are not representatives of Kenya Kwanza, nor representatives of Azimio. And I think looking at the outcome, we managed, in that time, we managed to comply with the constitutional requirement. When it comes to gender, we have enough gender in that mix. When it comes to people with disabilities, we have somebody who's elected to represent us in that. The youth are there. And of course, we also have people who have institutional memory in the East Africa Legislative Assembly, like Mheshimiwa Kalonzo. I think that was a good election. It was a good mix. And we are very confident with all those members who have been elected. And we hope they will represent the interest of Kenya in East Africa Legislative Assembly. There's a lot going on. There's a lot we expect to be going on in the East Africa Legislative Assembly, especially after His Excellency the President William Ruto visited both Uganda and Tanzania, and that push towards
and yesterday in DRC
and that push towards having an East African federation, one currency, one language, and that kind of thing, and because we do a lot of trade with our neighboring countries in Uganda and Tanzania and other East African countries. And for some reasons, there are a lot of people from other parts of the East African countries doing business in Kenya. But unfortunately, Kenyans are not doing much of that business in some of these East African countries, like, for example, in Tanzania. So we think the members we have elected have their work cut out for them, representing our trade interests, representing our diplomatic interests, representing our tourism interest, and many other interests that we are going to have in terms of, a bloc called East Africa Community.
All right.
Yes.
Fantastic. And of course, right now the panel is full because I'm also joined by the Honorable Member of Parliament for Laikipia County, that is Jane Kagiri, as well as the Member of Parliament for Tadbaj, Hussein Barre. Like I told you, there would indeed be a full panel. Let me start with you, Jane, for a quick reaction on the election of members of Parliament to Iala, bearing in mind that the MPs from the region where you come from appear to go against the grain of an endorsed lineup to go with a different people.
Thank you, John. For me, what first I would want to say is that considering the 30 or so members who had been nominated by their various parties for the IALA positions, first, everybody on that list was qualified. And secondly, for us to have gone to Parliament and voted as we did is because we felt there are people who are qualified and were left out of the list, or maybe more qualified, or rather we needed a larger representation, which was not felt as per what we were told to do. So that is how come it ended the way it did. Yes.
Mheshimiwa Barre, when you left State House as members of Parliament from Kenya Kwanza, obviously after doing elections and identifying 5 individuals with whom you would go to Parliament and endorse as your IALA MPs, did you feel like your colleagues probably from Mount Kenya went against the grain in doing the choices they made that day?
Well, thank you for the show. I think there's an element of space for them actually to do what they did. Okay. Well, we agreed on some 5 people to a certain extent who have voted in State House. But then if we were to limit people to that level, we will have said no other person will appear in that list. But the fact that everybody appeared in the list, it means there's an element of people bending a little, that if they're discontented, this can be corrected. So I am sure they must have gone by that line, and I think whoever came through is qualified and will represent us at the end of the day, yes.
Mheshimiwa, obviously, as you were talking, you were trying to explain the importance of IALA, because to many Kenyans, and I think you've seen that conversation going on social media, and I think today's Daily Nation has also captured it, where it tends to claim that the only place where you can dump political rejects is IALA. Is that just the aspect?
No, that's not just, and that's not true. East Africa Legislative Assembly is a very important organ for the countries in this region. There's a lot of legislative agenda that goes on in that house. Like for example, when we're talking about the East African Cooperation, the countries, the East African countries coming together. Our president said very soon we shall have one currency. For that to happen, there has to be some legislation behind it. And that legislation cannot happen in the Kenya Assembly, it cannot happen in the Uganda Assembly or the Tanzania Assembly or any of the other East African countries. It has to happen in a legislative assembly that is for the East Africa Legislative Assembly. So there is a lot of work for that. There is a lot of trade between the East African countries. Most of that trade has to be governed by guidelines, has to be governed by legislation, has to be governed by rules and regulations, and all of that has to be legislated somewhere, and that is the East Africa Legislative Assembly. And of course, part of the work of of our members of parliament who have gone to East Africa Legislative Assembly is also to do what we call parliamentary diplomacy. They're doing. They're also ambassadors for Kenya in the East Africa Legislative Assembly, and they are there to protect the interests of Kenya vis-a-vis the interest of the larger East Africa. You see, we've been having issues on our border with Tanzania. We've been having issues on our border with Uganda, and that's a platform in which we can resolve some of those issues in terms of having a discussion with their fellow legislatures on the other part. So it's a very important organ, and the people we have sent there, as I had told you earlier, are neither Kenya Kwanza nor Azimio now. They are Kenyans now, and they are representing the interest of this great country called Kenya. Yes.
But from the eyes of the public, Mheshimiwa Jane, and you would understand the sudden interest, obviously, in who is representing them at IALA, and the faces, some of them that we saw, and who they are associated with. It goes down then to, do we have 9 competent members now heading to IALA? Because we understand the importance of the parliament, but do we have competent people now to do that job?
Thank you once again. I would want to add on to what Mheshimiwa said. Number one, we have very, very competent people who we have sent to IALA. As you earlier mentioned, of course, what was agreed on at State House is not what we presented at Parliament. But number one, let's remember, initially there was, of course, the confusion of why did we do what we did. But the outcome was pleasing to everybody, and everybody walked out happy. Remember, the young man that we added to that list is a youth. We have drawn inspiration for so many other young people in this country. Number one, to know that they don't have to go through elective process for them to get to those positions. Now, this young man could go to IALA and come back as a very strong leader in the Kenyan election system. Number two, out of the 9 people who we sent to IALA, they all campaigned to us, and I believe my colleagues can confirm that. These are people who are competent, who have very strong CVs. At least I can confidently vouch for 3. Honorable Shabal is my senior at MBA class. Honorable Kanini Kega is my senior at MBA class. Winnie Odinga was my classmate at MBA class. And all these other leaders, they gave us their CVs, they gave us their experience, they explained to us what they have done. So sending them to IALA, we know for one thing that is certain, we have sent competent people. And number one, let's not forget, for their parties to have proposed to them, they had already done a background check on them and realized these are competent people who would actually serve at IALA. Then let's also not forget, these are not political rejects. These are people, in fact, I keep saying, anybody who puts out their name to the ballot is already a success, because it takes a lot of confidence, it takes a lot of skill for you to even get your name onto a ballot. So they are actually not rejects, and I believe so far, looking at the history of IALA, this is the best team yet that we have sent to IALA to represent us.
All right. Talking about rejects, Mheshimiwa, looking at the number of members of parliament who came into the National Assembly after serving in IALA. You're looking at the Honorable Mpuru Wabori, Wanjiko Moher, including even Raila Odinga's brother, that is Dr. Oburu Odinga, also making it to the Senate. And that is why I was bringing in the aspect of rejects. Is the East African Legislative Assembly where you go cool down your heels, of course, as the strategies, and then come back and you make a comeback into Kenyan politics?
I think that is not the case. East Africa community is a very important institution within the region, largely because business is becoming the power actually that checks everything in the world currently. China is powerful because of the economies it has. So as a country, it's like relating county assemblies to the National Assembly. I somehow feel East African Assembly EALA is more stronger or more strategic to our development and progress than even the national parliaments, the way you can relate county assemblies and the national, because we really need to assemble many countries and many populations so that we can increase in businesses and other functional interactions so that we can progress. So anybody who is of the illusion that anybody who is in EALA is somebody who is actually going for a cool place or somewhere to cool himself, that is far from the truth. I think that's where we need to take more competent people who can bring the countries together and see the importance of actually building blocks so that non-tariff barriers and barriers between us are reduced. That is not the case. Yes.
And much of the legislation that comes from EALA will also depend on you in terms of domestication and actualization as members of parliament. And I don't know, Mheshimiwa Corey, if you've heard of concerns that some of our neighbors, so to say, that are joining the 9 members in EALA have either been dragging their feet in terms of the uptake of the East African community policies, and how, as a National Assembly in Kenya, you plan to engage your colleagues to deal with some of these inhibiting factors.
Yeah, of course, we, as a country, I think we take this whole process very seriously. That is why, unlike in the past, when we even used to send our members, quite late, almost midway, when the assembly has already started business. This time we've shown a lot of seriousness because of our stand as a country, especially the Kenya Kwanza government and the focus we have in terms of regional integration and making sure that we take the matters seriously. So of course there are matters that definitely will have to have some kind of discussions at both levels. And I can assure you, as the National Assembly members from Kenya, we will definitely take matters coming from East Africa Legislative Assembly very seriously. And if there was anybody perhaps having some cold feet, as you put it, hoping I've understood your question to mean some of the members whom we have sent there, I think the mere fact that as a House we have endorsed them as the representative of this country, and we told them in no uncertain terms, when we were wishing them well, that they are now the representatives of this country. Whatever views or whatever agenda they had is now behind them. If it was an Azimio agenda, if it was a Kenya Kwanza agenda, it is not the agenda they are going to take to East Africa. The agenda they are going to take there is now the Kenyan agenda. And of course, when we talk of Kenya Kwanza now, the government agenda also is part of it. So I think I have no doubt any of those 9 members, and I tell you, by the mere vote we've done, we achieved so many things, including making sure we have met the constitutional requirements of the members we're supposed to send there. And they're all competent, they are all great Kenyans, and none of them has got of any lower value than the other. And we will give them full support, and I'm sure they will do a good job to make Kenya proud.
Mheshimiwa Jane, coming from a background of an entrepreneur, I'm sure you've heard of what is common currency. At some point we even expect to have a common political formation. But even what is achievable, what we have thought we have achieved, how do you think we are faring? Because when you talk about non-tariff barriers in terms of trade, again, between the nations within East Africa, you will still find some inhibiting factors. Yet we have members representing us in EALA, yet we have a summit of heads of state, but we still have these problems.
Let me first continue from where my colleague left off. Again, I would want to reiterate on the importance of the combination that we are sending to EALA. I looked at, the Kenya Kwanza side. We have Hassan Omar, who contested for governor. We have Sankok, who has served in parliament. We have Honorable Kering, who has been a parliamentarian. We also have Honorable Falhada, who served in the Senate. And finally, we have the young man, Karofia. Looking at that combination, plus the combination coming from Azimio, let's remember we have entrepreneurs who actually trade across the borders. We have people who have served in both houses, so they know the challenges that we've been encountering, even including trade. So why I would want to confidently keep speaking about that combination is that I know this is a set of parliamentarians who will be totally different from the others. Of course, being an entrepreneur, there are many things we'd want to bring up on this issue. And of course, as you said, the trade barriers that we encounter between the East African countries, those are some of the issues that we'll be sending them to actually represent as well. And again, as my colleague mentioned earlier, we need them to be ambassadors for this country. We need our tourism improved. We need our, of course, the level of trade between our country and theirs going higher. But I believe this combination is one that is going to prove everybody wrong. Yes.
The combination. Yes. Mheshimiwa Barry, there is what members of parliament understand, there is what this region understands in terms of why we need to have representation from the countries within East Africa. My only question is, as you interact with the public, do you get a sense that Kenyans really do not understand the value of East African Legislative Assembly? Because you can see even in some of the media items, you're seeing the kind of bashing that is facing the EALA Parliament.
I think that challenge exists, and I think the communication aspect of EALA must up their game. There is an element of not knowing much about in the public realm. I think it is more of, to a certain extent, should I say for lack of word, elitist to some extent. So I think we really have to cascade this information and the importance of East Africa to the public so that everybody knows the importance. So there's that challenge that exists. But I am sure this was aired and raised up by a number of people, not only here, but from different forums. And I am sure it's going to improve. Even those who are going to the East African Parliament, our legislators, have also heard that, and I am of the opinion that something will improve and the public will get to know. But as of now, that challenge exists.
That challenge exists.
Yes.
I wish them all the best. Let's switch gears and get to the hot topic of a week. I'm sure you also want to quip it on the issue of GMO. We'll deal with that at some point. Let's talk about the business of elections. Mheshimiwa Kwari. There's a petition before the Justice and Legal Affairs Committee seeking the removal of the 4 commissioners. Gauging but the reaction of members of parliament when the speaker read out that this petition or these petitions existed in parliament, you could tell the direction this is likely to take in terms of Kenya Kwanza being Kenya Kwanza and Azimio being Azimio. What is your view about the petition?
I think any right, any Kenyan concerned about Kenya would really support the petition that those 4 commissioners should go, not today, but yesterday. Because those are people who almost put this country on the brink of, burning. People who, because of wanting to protect some funny individual interest, wanted to put Kenya on a very, very bad path, wanting to defeat our democracy, wanting to, they even violated their own, role as defined by the constitutions. So these individuals, you see, there has to be consequences for the actions people take, and if you have taken the wrong action, it doesn't help people to just brush these things under the carpet and forget about it until the next election cycle. That is why electoral violence never ends in this country. People do bad things and there's proof about it, and then people want just to forget about it because this idea of saying so and so has won, let's just move on. We move on where? And this problem will be with us again tomorrow. So these guys, because of the mere fact that they almost put this country at war, they almost, made us a laughing stock in the entire world. They wanted to make our democracy, rubbish. I think they should go like yesterday, not even today. And I'm sure we will support that petition, and those guys will have to see the end. We have to have a very clean IBC. The chairman has retired, and those 4 commissioners need to go with him so that we can start a clean slate, on a clean slate.
All right. Jane, first of all, your reaction to that, to the 3 petitions.
First, I totally support it.
Okay.
Because for once we need to get to become responsible as a country. Whenever we take an oath, let us know where we have taken that oath and what we are committing ourselves to do. For those commissioners, I would totally support, and in fact I would go by what developed countries do. If it was any one of them, they should have resigned even before waiting for a petition to actually be filed against them. Because what they took us through was wrong. what they did was actually, in fact, unjustifiable, because when you stand there, knowing you're putting the lives of women, children, innocent people at stake by just the utterance of your mouth. So I believe they need to take responsibility. And in fact, if anything, beyond that, they need to answer for, to be answerable for what they did. So I totally support the petition, and if I was them, I would actually resign and not wait to actually for the petition.
Which Mobari, do you support the petition?
I join my colleagues in supporting that petition. These people have risked the very existence of this country. They were taking us to much worse than 2017, 2018. And these people, some of them were in the counting hall. They were announcing this result. Then coming back to say something different, I think they have gone against the group responsibility, and they have touched the very existence of this country. So their resignation, they are giving way to others, should have been done yesterday, not even tomorrow. So these people should go, and let's get a clean slate of people too. I think even next time, these people should not hold any public office because of how they've acted. They should maintain themselves in private
you're
practice.
Seeking a further recommendation.
A further recommendation. These people should not hold, so that it serves as a lesson to others who are going to hold any public office of that magnitude. This is actually my advice. Yes.
Mheshimiwa, you realize that there's a section of this country that is yet to move on from the outcome of this election and how it ended up. There are those who would say then that these four commissioners may not be at fault. What they did is to blow a whistle on probably some of the illegalities, if there were any, happening during the conduct of the verification process and the announcement of results. Are we sure at this point that this is the conversation we want to have at this point?
Yes, I think there's no any other time to have this conversation other than now. We've just come out of a very divisive election. And we've gone through the trends and patterns of what we normally go through in very divisive elections like this before. But we now have to take a step right now, because in the past elections, perhaps we've said let's move on, and that let's move on has not been of any help to us. Anybody doubting that these people did what they did out of malice and bad faith, that fear has been rested by the Supreme Court when it ruled on the fact that what they did was not proper. If they had any case, perhaps Supreme Court would have ruled the outcome of that case differently. But the mere fact that the Supreme Court has pronounced itself on this matter, I don't think we need to wait for any other further evidence that these guys, in the famous now Kenyan whatever, what they were saying was hot air.
Jen, of course, Mheshimiwa references the Supreme Court, and you remember in the decision by the Supreme Court, it actually calls the action of the commissioners as a last-minute boardroom eruption. That is what the judges of the Supreme Court call it. But then again, they go ahead and make recommendations that the IEBC also needs to be revisited so that you define the powers of the chairperson. In a way, you're trying to fault how the chairman also acted in the entire process. So if you're interested in the four commissioners, why don't we extend it even to the retiring chairperson and the two commissioners?
Allow me to first pick it up from the general election. And I would want to state, having gone through a previous election, and I'm sure my colleagues would confirm this was the most organized election by IEBC. Sometimes we want to say that it was a divisive election, but if you look at the silence that went after the ruling of the Supreme Court, it's because nobody had evidence that would counter what the Supreme Court was saying. Because on whatever side of the political divide you are, you actually saw a fair election. So the outcome has nothing you can go against. So number one, it was a very well organized election, and for these four commissioners to come in after and say that what was actually happening, they were not part of it, was something that looked very far from the truth, because throughout the whole process we had been seeing them as Kenyans, as they briefed us, as they read out the results. Then for them to later on come back and say, just the same way as me as a candidate, I will not come back and say that the IEBC was not fair, because even on the ground they kept calling us for meetings, they kept briefing us, they kept updating us on any developments. So at the end of the day, everybody has to take what their responsibility was. As for the chair, you cannot include him in that, because there is nowhere he went out of what he was supposed to be doing. all the updates, he kept inviting them. In fact, finally, it is them who actually pulled out from the meetings and decided to have their own, that they would now declare that the process was not right. So I think, of course, we must go by the recommendations of the court, which, if you look at the recommendations they gave in 2017, are actually what helped us have a better election this time. So again, we hope to take up the recommendations and have an even better election in 2027. So, thank you.
Mheshimiwa Bara, there are those who argue, as the JLAC listens to the three petitioners, and of course I've seen in the schedule they will also invite the 4 commissioners to respond to the claims made. But there are those who argue JLAC has no work here because the Supreme Court, just like you've mentioned, already appeared to directly convict the 4 commissioners of incompetence. When you say is a last-minute boardroom eruption or an afterthought, there are people who argue that in itself was a conviction coming from the Supreme Court judges in a unanimous decision.
I share a sentiment with the latter group that said the courts have actually made a position on this, and we go by that, and there's no reason these people should be invited. I am of that opinion. Yes.
You stand with that opinion?
Yes.
The question is now, Mheshimiwa Kore, and I'm wondering, as members of parliament, as you deal with this, of course, JLAC will have to write a report and then bring it to you guys for debate. But I'm wondering, what is the threshold so that you get rid of this 4 commissioners, or you say you're not going to write a recommendation to the president to remove the 4 commissioners? What is the threshold in terms of parliamentary procedures?
I think, like you said, there is that fair due process to which they will be subjected to. The committee will discuss. They will be given a fair chance to say their side of the story. But like you've already put it earlier, there's a conviction here, and if there's that very clear picture to everybody, like my Mheshimiwa colleague just said earlier, the fairest thing for these 4 commissioners would have been to resign, and just leave. But if they want to be dragged through the entire process of judicial processes and the commission that the president forms, and so be it. It's their right. But I think the threshold is there. These guys, they almost put this country on fire, and as Kenyans of goodwill, we think people have to, people have to take responsibility of their actions, and somebody has to be, held responsible for especially those constitutional office holders who've sworn to defend the constitution and to treat everybody fairly in a transparent manner. If they don't live to that, then definitely we just don't need to hide behind finalese, legalese, to try and save them. There's nothing to save there. We want, and I'm sure most Kenyans would be feeling the same way I feel. We would want to have a very clean IBC, right from the chair who's retiring and going to the commissioners, so that the recommendations that the court gave can be implemented by a new, fresh commission, which is not tainted. This commission, even if we do those recommendations that the court has said, if we have those individuals who are already tainted, and the politics in this country being what it is, there are some people who already feel, if you touch these commissioners, you are touching us because we are not healed. It has got nothing to do with Azimio. It has got nothing to do with Kenya Kwanza. It has got to do with some Kenyans who are given constitutional responsibilities to supervise our elections, and they squandered it. And they almost put this country on fire. They have to stand up and be judged on their action, nothing else.
All right, and we'll talk about a fresh commission for that matter. But Mheshimiwa Jane, the question of bipartisanship when this matter comes to Parliament, because of course you saw some of the mamas that came out of the petition. Listening to all of you as members of Parliament, because at the end of the day you will vote, it appears like it's a foregone conclusion that these 4 commissioners will go, despite the report that JLAC will bring to the floor of the House.
Certainly it is. I would also, I mean, just as I began, if I was them, I would just resign. Reason being, remember the Supreme Court, they were also given a chance to respond to all the accusations that were there. If they could not put the side that they were defending to pride, then what other business would they have to come and explain to us that they actually did their work? So I think it would be, for lack of better words, they should save us the resources as a country. They should save us the time, because we know we have so many challenges we are going through as a country. They should save us that time and not make us go through a process which they know they should not even be rightfully be in those offices at the moment. Yeah.
And of course, it is reported that the divisions at the IEBC continue to deepen as days go by. Mheshimiwa Bare, that's still a question on bipartisanship. Do you think Parliament will rise above political affiliation to probably then deliver justice to Kenyans and the 4 commissioners?
I think the election is behind us. It's now Kenya. And I think the issue of bipartisanship will be lesser. And any sensible person, whichever side of the political divide you are in, will, in retrospection, see that these commissioners were not on the right. It was just very partisan and very parochial. So I am sure with the election over and everybody wants a fair and a proper election in the coming days, I am sure we will rise beyond partisanship, and we will all join hands in sending these commissioners home so that we can have a new IEBC that will serve everybody and fairly. And this, they will serve also as a lesson, so that those who are going to be taken as commissioners will not behave the same way these ones have behaved. Yes.
A new IEBC that serves everybody. Quite an interesting aspect you raised there, Mheshimiwa Kore. Is it possible, within the circumstances and within the legal framework that we have, to have an IEBC that serves everybody,
I think,
and not political interests?
Yeah, I think it is possible. You know, we are a very hopeful nation, and we have to live with that hope. Of course, certain things need to change. Even some legal parameters need to change in order to have that, perfect IEBC that we want. Although there is nothing called perfection in the world, there will always be some gaps here and there, which gives us room to perfect in the next election. Because if you look at the history of the multi-party elections in this country, the next election has always been better than the other one, because of the lessons we've learned from the previous one, and then the recommendations that come from, remember Kriegler came in after the 2007 violence. A lot of recommendations, helped us improve our elections. The last election, a lot of recommendations came up. Even this one, apart from the Supreme Court rulings and recommendations, I'm sure when we do the public participation thing, a lot of other ideas will come up on how to improve our elections. So yes, I'm hopeful that ideal IEBC that we all desire can happen in Kenya in our lifetime. Yes.
Of course, the appointment of commissioners, Mheshimiwa Jane, is a political process. But how do we detach parochial interests from the commission? Because you understand the 4 commissioners are accused of having been affiliated to a political side. Some of them are even accused of being family members to top honchos then. And that is likely an allegation we will continue having as we move forward. But instilling confidence in the IEBC, what is that silver bullet?
Looking at the presidents that we are taking in this country, whether you bring in your relative, you bring in your family, they have to be above reproach. And I'm sure we've all watched what we went through in the vetting of the cabinet secretaries. So what I believe, in fact, with the petition that has been filed against the 4 commissioners, I'm sure the leaders will reach out to somebody and tell them, I want to appoint you as a commissioner. And the person will say, no, thank you. So what I believe with these particular appointments of commissioners to the IEBC, we will get the best of the best. Whether you're a relative, whether you're cloney, whether somebody close to you, there will be people coming in knowing it is a profession they're coming into. Because after this, they will see there's an aftermath to all their actions. So whether you do it right or you do it wrong, you do it right, you'll be appreciated. You do it wrong, there'll be consequences to it. So I believe this is one appointment of commissioners that will have the best of the best for the country.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think just to add on that, as you said, the silver bullet will be how we deal with these commissioners.
How us
Yes.
how we deal with these issues.
Yes, the lessons we learn, or the other people who want to become commissioners, the lessons they will learn from how we deal with these commissioners is actually what will make the commissioners to be non-partisan or partisan. If we remove these guys, as we are saying, or they resign, and we even go further to say that they are not going to hold any public office anymore in their life, anybody, whether you're brought by your family or by your party or by anybody, when you get into that position of being a commissioner, you will think of your future and how the impact this will have on you. So everybody will act with responsibility. So it depends on how we act with these commissioners. So these commissioners will go, after going, no holding public office. Everybody else will be fearing. Today.
Let me ask a follow-up question, Mheshimiwa Bari, because Mheshimiwa Kora said we are a hopeful nation. And every time after an election cycle we've had problems or not have had, we have hoped for a better election and probably even made legislation to seek to improve the next election. The journey we have walked is from a situation where members of a commission used to be appointed by the president. Then we went to an IPPG process, went to a selection panel, and I think now it has a lot of representation, including from faith-based organizations. But you still find the same accusation of political mistrust, despite the fact that we have tried to do reforms in terms of how we pick the commissioners. So what is this guarantee that we shall not have the same accusations in the next election?
Well, accusations are going to be there always. Complaints are going to be there in life. It's not ever going to end. Even if you bring Jesus and Muhammad here to become our commissioners, people will still complain. But then we will weigh the relevance or the significance of this complaint. So I think we keep on improving, but the complaints are going to be there. But then we will always be weighing how significant, how important they are. Can we move on, or this is something that will derail us? So I think until the end of time, complaints are going to be there.
And maybe just to add a little bit on it, you see, we are going to do things differently, obviously. And one of the ways that I think we need to do as a country, this is my opinion, is to do, a commissioner is as good as the process that has brought in that commissioner. So we need to deal with a number of things before we even arrive at that commissioner. We need to make sure all the processes that are involved in terms of making sure we end up with these commissioners are processes that Kenyans have confidence in, are processes that are open, they are transparent, and all Kenyans have confidence in it. You see? And move a little bit further in the processes and also in the recruitment of those commissioners. We need to do what we call conflict-sensitive recruitment, so that sometimes a well-intentioned move can cause conflict at some point if you have not taken that fact into consideration as you are doing that process now. So I think we'll see how we can share some of the ideas that we have in terms of doing a conflict-sensitive recruitment of commissioners. Yes. A
conflict-sensitive recruitment of commissioners. It's good you talk about that. One of the amendments that is in Parliament brought to by Kimani Ichung'wah, the majority leader, is actually an amendment of the law that establishes the IBC selection panel. Now to bring in representation from the political parties liaison committee. I know you're stakeholders in the process of elections. Doesn't that take us back to where we were running away from?
Yes and no, because as we've all kept reiterating, it's all about the process. So you could be partisan based on the political party you're coming from, but the end result is you still want to bring in somebody who is going to be competitive, who is going to be answerable to the country, and who is going to deliver on the mandate that they are going to be given. So whichever way, because just as my colleague has said, you bring in partisan, you bring in political parties, you don't bring them in, there'll still be questions about at the end of the day. But I believe because it's going to be an all-inclusive process, I believe the public will also be brought in to give in their views on the appointed candidates. At the end of the day, I'm sure we are going to make sure we sieve out and we get a person who is going to be competitive for the process. And again, they'll still be debated in Parliament once the names are brought in. So we'll still have an input into it at the end of the day.
One of the biggest challenges we've had, and I think we saw it particularly in the election of 2017, is that we brought commissioners too late in the day to manage the elections of 2017. We have a retiring chairperson and 3 commissioners, actually 2 commissioners, that is Chebukati, the chairperson, Boyamolu, and Professor Gulie exiting as commissioners of the IEBC. We now have another political process quasi-judicial, if you were to say so, happening in Parliament, that could actually end up with having no commissioner at all at the IEBC. What assurance does Kenya have that members of Parliament are going to fast-track the process, so much so that the Commission now starts preparing for the next election in good time, and you don't end up where we were in 17?
I think the retirement of these 3 commissioners, including the chairman, and the removal that we want to do, because they did not want to resign, of these 3 commissioners, is coming at the right time. We have a good time actually to prepare, and I am sure the MPs or the parliamentarians are cognizant of this. So the earlier we sought this commission, the better. I think this is the right time. We will have ample time actually to prepare and correct whatever that has gone wrong. So I think this is the right time. Yes.
One of the responsibilities that falls into your hands, Mheshimiwa Kore, is the reshaping of the legal framework, because the Supreme Court asked that you do that, so that first of all you properly define the roles of chairperson and the secretariat of the commission, and again to define whether he indeed is the national returning officer in this election.
Yeah, that's a good recommendation, and I think we will discuss, we'll debate all of that, and definitely our debate and our recommendation will also be subjected to the public for public participation. A lot of experts will also give their views on. But I agree, where there is a lacuna in law, like for example, it's not clear whether the chairman of the IBC is supposed to be the sole returning officer, or he's supposed to be a returning officer in groups with others. You know, those are some of the things that need to be defined, and the more clearer this is, the better commission we shall have, and the better laws for governing our elections we shall have. So that's a very good recommendation coming from the Supreme Court, and definitely as members of Parliament, and I'm sure our colleagues in the Senate will definitely give this the weight that it requires, so that it becomes a force of law.
All right. Let me take you back, Jane, a bit. And I'm looking at the 2017 election, and I'm on Chebukati. He's a retiring man, so obviously nothing much on his bid. But you will remember, after the court ordered for the repeat of elections, we had one commissioner flee the country.
Yes.
I think a little bit later, Chebukati and Chiloba could not see eye to eye. Chiloba had to exit as CEO. And then the other 3 remaining commissioners resigned, accused the chairperson of high-handedness. Now, we have a replica of the same situation nearly 4 or 5 years later. And my question is, Jane, you're not convinced that even the chairperson has a managerial problem in terms of how he manages the commission?
I would believe it would be, we would take it back to what the recommendations that the Supreme Court actually gave, because if there is no clear definition of one's duties, of course there'll be a question of, is he crossing over to the other commissioner's work, and are they also trying to take up what his work is? So I believe we've talked about, we are trying to better the process, and of course with the recommendations that we were given, we are certainly going to have clear mandate for a chair, and the clear mandate for the commissioners. Again, we could look at it both ways. We could say he's the constant in both cases, but he could also be a definite constant who does the right thing and refuses to be bulged, you know. So we could look at it both ways and not assume that he's the problem. It could also be a case of the other people could be the problem. But now with the recommendations we have, we are working towards a process that will be so clear and so straight. And if I would want to add about the 2022 elections, even looking at the number of petitions we have in the courts, on cases of MP, members of parliament, as well as the Senate, the cases are very few. That goes to confirm that this was a very good and well-organized election, the 2022 one. So again, we are improving as we grow, and I believe 2027 should even be better.
Should be better.
Yeah.
Let me pick your mind a bit, Waheshimiwa, on that recommendation, because you said you would look at that legislation, obviously emanating from the recommendation of the Supreme Court. Because there were 2 situations here painted at the Supreme Court, where you have one chairperson with absolute authority on matters of verification and announcement of results. And the commissioners were saying, we look like flower girls. When the lawyer of a chairperson stands says they had actually subdivided duties among themselves as commissioners. But it appeared like the work of the final announcement of results and tallying was on the end of the chairperson. As we move into the future, Mheshimiwa Barry, would you want, as a member of parliament, to see power vested in the chairperson, absolute authority, or would you want to see responsibilities when it comes to verification and announcement of results being subdivided among the commissioners, so much there's no feeling of we are flower girls in this commission?
For me, I feel the status quo is the best.
Is the best?
Is the best. Okay. In the sense that probably there's going to be an equal people, let's say 3 saying this, 3 saying that. Somebody has to make a decision at the end of the day. So I think, and even going by the decision taken by the chairman in the just concluded election, and from what we're saying of the commissioners, and how things are going, everybody can attest to how right the commissioner has acted. So I think they'll have a debate. But I think the commissioner, the overall commissioner, should be the person who will make the final decision as it is, and I think it's the best way.
The status quo.
Yes.
Mheshimiwa Kore?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. You see, like for example, when we seek for clarity on who will make the announcement, all the 5 commissioners cannot make the announcement at the same time. There has to be somebody vested with that responsibility to make the announcement, and definitely that is the chair of the commission, as it has always been the tradition. I think there's a lot of gray areas that many Kenyans don't understand in this whole conflict between the commissioners and the chair. And I think during such intense political times, when nobody wants even to accept the results, this type of animated misunderstandings happen. But it's good now the Supreme Court has announced itself on it, given a direction on how to go about it. As legislators, we will debate that. We will obviously give our views on how best that we might come up with a very, very interesting, scenario which satisfies all Kenyans. But looking at it in generality, it doesn't look like a big thing. It just needs to be made clearer who makes the announcement and the role of the other commissioners in the verification, which I think partly I may agree with some of their arguments, because there has to be checks and balances even in the commission. If you say you vest all the powers and responsibilities on one individual, this is Kenya, my friend.
All right. Then I would want status quo change.
Allow me to chip in further on the same question. There are 2 things I would want to mention. The first one is there's no question of who becomes a flower girl or not, because with the digital age we are moving very fast. And if you remember what happened in this election, they kept uploading the results. So as much as the commissioners would want to compete on who announces, they're actually announcing something that we are aware of, and they need to appreciate that the process has actually moved ahead of us. So even if we bring in a new commission, let them remember the process is the same. There is nothing that can be altered once it goes onto the system. And if we remember, since the amendment of the Election Act, every election ends at the polling station. And that is what maybe every other political leader needs to agree and confirm. Because even when the 4 commissioners went out there saying that the results were doctored, and we go back and look at what we have at the polling stations, there was actually nothing that was different. So to anybody coming in on the assumption that the commissioner's position is too powerful, you can adjust, you can change, you can comment, you can change the process, they should come in knowing it is rather a finished process. Then they're just coming to put the icing on the cake. We have already done all the work at the bottom.
All right, quite interesting. I want us to change gears a bit before we wind up. In the next hour, I'm going to have an expert on issues of GMO. But let's talk about it for a minute. In the elections, we were talking about Camargo. Are we planning to bring maize from the Camargos? Mheshimiwa Barry, because the question is, what is this fuss about GMO? Do you support, first of all, the importation of GMO maize into Kenya?
First of all, let me be clear on these GMO things. In my opinion is, I am not an expert in this field.
Yes.
I am not a scientific expert. I will rely on the expert to advise us on this. But what I should say is that we should never be exporting maize from other places. We have enough land. We only have to reorganize on how we will produce our own food. What pains me sometimes is actually when we build a lot of stone structures in the most agriculturally productive areas in this country, like in Kiambu, Embu, and all these places. And in the other places where we cannot plant much are vacant. So I think policy-wise we must protect the agricultural land and put in enough money and we produce a lot so that we avoid this issue of importing GMOs. I know currently we are facing some challenges of food insecurity, and I think a stopgap measure must be done. As to whether we should import the GMOs or different types of cereals, I think I will leave that to the advice of the expert. Yes.
Let me get you more clear.
Yeah.
The cabinet has lifted the ban on GMO. Of course, you're saying we need to invest more in agriculture, our own, do our own farming. But you're saying you have no problem with bringing in GMO maize as a stopgap measure to deal with the situation we have.
Well, if they are not causing much harm, if advised by those who are expert in that field, I have no problem.
Okay.
But should the adverse effect be worse than the drought we are facing, I think we have no reason to import them. So I largely rely on the advice given to us by the expert in that field, the non-partisan expert in that field.
Non-partisan experts in that field.
Yeah, I'll tell you straight, without fear of contradiction, that I think the cabinet decision to allow the importation of GMO in this country after the 10-year moratorium is the right thing to do. Because how did the cabinet arrive at that decision in the first place?
Yeah.
There are a number of events that triggered even the thought in the cabinet so that it can arrive at that decision. One, we have a very serious food shortage in this country, particularly from where I come from in the pastoral lands in northern Kenya. We've had 6 successive seasons of rain failure, and we don't grow crops. We depend on livestock as the main livelihood, for us, and that livestock is now almost gone. Those people who had cattle, it's like they're saying bye-bye to cattle. It's only goats and camels which are still trying to survive in that very difficult terrain. So we have had very serious nutritional shortage, very serious food shortage, and for those who have got lucky to get some rains in the bread baskets of this country. They have reports of emergence of some pests which were not there before, which are clearing fields of maize and what have you. There are diseases which were not there before, crop diseases which are emerging in some of these areas and destroying the crops. So the areas where we relied on to get maize and what have you did not have enough maize to feed the entire country. Maybe right now as we speak, there might be some bumper harvest in some parts of this country from what I hear. But a few months ago, there was nothing. Very serious drought, and there was no food, and there was a lot of so Kenyans have one problem generally. We always talk about research and science, but when the research and science gives some findings, we also become scientists all of a sudden. Everybody giving his own or her own opinion on a matter which they have no knowledge about. So there is no scientific evidence on the fact that GMO causes cancer. I've not seen it anywhere. And what GMO is actually, the GMO food we're talking about, if it is maize or if it's any other food, is basically to use biotechnology to capitalize on the certain parameter. For example, if it is rain, which we are lacking now, how do we genetically engineer maize seed which will be drought resistant, so that we can continue plowing that maize and produce that food. If it is the problem of pests, like in some parts of this country, which is destroying fields of how do we come up with a genetically modified seed that is resistant to disease, that is resistant to pest, that is resistant to weeds, so that we can have instead of using a lot of money on pesticides, on herbicides, on other chemicals to treat, and so that the cost of production becomes higher. We produce this genetically modified food at a lesser cost and at a higher yield, so that we can have enough food in this country. So I straight away completely support. And by the way, my background, I'm an agronomist, and I have some little knowledge about agriculture and these production processes. Some of my colleagues I was in college with, I have a friend I even talked to a few days ago. He majored in the field of biotechnology, and I posed this question to him. We have this problem now in this country. We want food, and the cabinet has approved, the importation of GMO foods. As an expert, what would you say? And he said, there's no harm in importing the genetically modified food. There's nothing wrong about it. But of course, people have different interests. I would understand, for example, right now, some Kenyans who have produced maize, and they have a lot of maize in their stores, that would say, please don't import the GMO foods now until we have exhausted the maize we have in the stores. That makes sense to me. They're not saying GMO is bad. They're just saying this maize, if it comes, it will lower the price of maize, and we might not recover what we spent on the maize which you already have in the store. And I think that's a concern that can be sorted by government, guaranteeing them that we shall buy all your maize.
Once you produce,
we shall buy all your maize at a good market rate. Doesn't stop us from importing GMO, so that we can continue feeding people in northern parts of this country who've lost livestock, but they need food now to survive.
Long-term solution. And I think Mheshimiwa Bara was a little bit cautious. Which one do you take, the extreme or the cautious?
No, for me, first I would need to put a disclaimer. I'm no expert on matters GMO, but I remember when the ban was lifted, I asked a friend of mine and asked them, where has this ban been lifted? And the friend told me, Jane, we have options. We may have all these dangers that are explained on GMO, and then we have our people dying from hunger. So which is which? And of course I would go with, we better allow with lifting of the ban and the importation of the food, the GMO food, rather than our people struggling and dying from hunger. But that said, I would want to support and say, before we allow any importation of food, have we exhausted all our food reserves locally? Because I come from a place, I come from Laikipia, and we have places like Ngarua, places like Olmoran. They have very successful harvests. In fact, when I go there over the weekend, they're now drying their maize on the roads. So my question would be, have we exhausted all the maize in Ngarua? Have we exhausted all the maize in Olmoran before we think of importing food? Because this same food is what could serve the other parts of the country. And number two, as we plan to buy this food, of course we've said the low cost of GMO foods and all that, but let's also remember our farmers planted this food at a time when farm inputs were very expensive. So they are selling their maize at high prices, which everybody would want to run away from. But can we remember, these people also struggled to get this food in, to be planted, to grow, and the inputs are what they're trying to recover from the prices that they're giving for these foods that they're selling. Then I would also want to add and to state to a government, which I am in, that's the Kenya Kwanza government. We look at a place like the areas I've stated, and especially let me pick Olmoran. Like now, the day before, last week we had one of the illegal grazers spear one of our farmers. And unfortunately, that was a fatality because the farmer died. So we cannot be talking of food shortage. Well, again, on the other side, we are allowing illegal grazers to come graze on somebody's maize plantation. And on the other hand, we talk of importing the maize. So I think we also have to put our measures in check locally, ensure that we are maximizing production of food locally before we can actually think of bringing food from outside.
A very quick one before we head over to Mombasa. It's a catch-22 situation in the sense that our people are dying hungry at this point. Then there are those who say, of course, GMO is affiliated or is associated with health hazards. You will die later. And I think that's what Moses Kuria was trying to say the other day when he was justifying the importation of a GMO. It's a catch-22 situation, Mheshimiwa Bara.
Yes, as I've said, I am not an expert, I am sure, but I am sure the lifting of the ban was arrived at after a consultation with people who have the know-how. I think as of now, that should go on, but starting with what my colleagues have said, let's exhaust the local food reserves that exist. But then for now, if there are shortages, I think we should allow whatever we can come with. But I think we will explore that with time. And I am sure we will arrive at the right decision, yes.
I would want to know whether you'll be seeking answers in Parliament, Mheshimiwa Kore, because you've seen a headline in the dailies that there is a ship that has docked in Mombasa carrying maize. Of course, what the paper doesn't say whether this maize is GMO or but it's no gazette notice on maize importation. So one is wondering, what is really happening?
I think this is a government and respecting the rule of law, and we will do everything according to what the law says in this country. Of course, the newspaper stories which are unverified, you don't know what is in it, what is not in it. We cannot comment on it. But I can assure you that we have the substantive CS for agriculture now. We have the Committee for Agriculture at the National Assembly. Definitely, we will discuss all these issues, and we'll do the right thing for this country. The only thing I would add is, you see, at this point in time, where technology is supposed to be used to leverage and help us, achieve, make life comfortable for everybody. This mistrust that Kenyans have on technology, especially when the new things come, and then in the theory of development, where we have the laggards, the early adopters, the late adopters. This is real for us also, but I know I would urge Kenyans to give science a chance, give technology a chance, and so long as our own experts, even in government, have said we have done a research on this, we have dealt with this, let's give it a try, because the bottom line is we are trying to do this to make life more easier for Kenyans, life more easier for humanity, and I perfectly understand, as I had said earlier, if there are Kenyans who have produced some maize, the government needs to consider, and we will definitely raise even these issues in Parliament. The government will definitely have to consider that the effort that those Kenyans put in the production of their produce doesn't go to waste, and they need to be compensated adequately.
Absolutely. But of course, you can imagine the kind of panic such a headline will cause. And the merchants of fear, what they're likely to do with such a headline.
For me, I would want to assume it's a food donation. Because my reasoning would be, considering the time the ban was lifted, I believe for a ship to leave, let's say America, and get to Kenya, would be at a minimum of 90 days. So those are 3 months. Looking at the time the ban was lifted and now, I would wonder if the ship left before the ban was lifted for it to be actually at the port. So that's my hope and prayer, that it is actually a food donation.
And this reminds me one thing. You see, as I told you, I come from a region where food is scarce right now. And there are Kenyans who have had bumper harvest. I think Kenyans should also come out and be magnanimous to their fellow Kenyans. If for example, food, assuming maybe like Mheshimiwa says, that is relief food that is stocked on a harbour, why should we wait for this food coming thousands of kilometers from elsewhere to come and help Kenyans who are having problems? And yet, when the government says we will import GMO food so that we can support these families which do not have food, Kenyans who have had bumper harvest will be up in arms. You cannot import because our prices will go down. Mheshimiwa has talked about stabbing of, she called quotes illegal. And we have seen places like in Mwingi where it was Kitui, where we have seen herders and then farmers we don't want to help each other. We don't want to accommodate each other. For those who have problems, we will always want to protect our turf, and
every man for his own. And yet, when something comes in terms of policy to support those who are not producing, those who are producing will be up in arms against the whole thing. This doesn't mean to say that the Kenyans who have produced maize in this bumper harvest shouldn't be compensated for their effort. Definitely they should. But the GMO imports must go on. All right. Fantastic. I need to wind you up because I want to bring in the GMO, the expert now, to probably tell us, much more about the GMO food. So give each one of you 30 minutes to do your
30 minutes.
Remarks. Starting with you, Mheshimiwa Barry.
30 minutes.
30 minutes?
30 minutes?
No, 30 seconds.
Okay.
That's good.
30 minutes too much. 30 seconds, guys.
I think we've just concluded an election. There are quite a number of issues in the country, the drought, the formation of the new government and all that. Those challenges exist. Specifically, if I address myself to my constituents, there are a lot of challenges going on relating to the drought and the unions of the government. I just want to inform them, and I just want to inform the whole country that everything is in control. The issues of security are going to be handled. This issue of drought is going to end soon, and everything will begin on a right trajectory, and Kenya will be a success at the end. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Mheshimiwa Kore?
Yeah, I think we'll take this time this golden opportunity to wish all the candidates, those who are doing the KEPRA exams. I know many Kenyans don't know what KEPRA is. That is the grade 6. They're doing a national exam now called KEPRA, Kenya Primary School Education Assessment. And then there's those who are doing the KCPE and those who are going to do the KCSE from beginning next week or something like that. I want to take this opportunity to wish all the candidates in the country all the best in the coming exams. Particularly for those students taking exams in my constituency, especially during this time when we have very, very serious droughts, and with the lack of even school feeding program, some of those candidates are going to do exams under very difficult circumstances. I know there are some candidates who are going to be moved from the schools where they've been studying because of insecurity so that they can do exams in a more peaceful centers. I know there are schools which will see armored vehicles come in to their schools with exam materials. Those are very stressful circumstances for young students to go through during this time they do exams. So I wish them all the best during this very difficult time. And for the other debates, I think thumbs up to GMO. Cherera and the course must go, and the guys who've been elected to Yala must represent as well. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Allow me to take this opportunity to thank the great people of Laikipia. This being my first time on KBC, it's good to say thank you for giving me an opportunity to serve you. Secondly, I wish the candidates all the best in the exams, and I know they will succeed despite the many challenges that they're encountering. I would also want to place a rallying call to all of us as the citizens of Kenya. It's not an easy time, and just as my colleague has said, let's help each other, but also let's help each other legally. If my goat goes into my neighbor's compound to eat their food, I am an illegal grazer. I am not a neighbor. So let's just work within the law to support each other, to help each other. And of course, for my county, I'll keep fighting for human-wildlife conflict has to come to an end. We cannot be planting crops for the animals to feed on them. And then, of course, security remains top on my list, that we have to ensure people are safe. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Mheshimiwa Jane Kagiri, the Member of Parliament for Laikipia, as well as Abdul Haro Kore, the Member of Parliament for Mandera South, and Hussein Barre, the MP for Tarbaj. We want to take a break. Of course, head to Mombasa and link up with Hibak. When we come back, we have an expert on these issues of climate change, science, GMO. He's actually from Laikipia. Awesome. Daniel Wanjoke will be joining us once we're back from Mombasa. But for now, Hibak, over to you.
Thank you, JJ. It is the second day of the IEK convention. The theme for the day is men in engineering, women in engineering. We're trying to see how gender comes into the sector and how that plays out. With me here, I have women in STEM. If you could just come closer, if you could just tell us, women in engineering, this usually STEM is kind of a difficult place for women, and women penetrating into this system is mostly a challenge. If you could just tell me as a woman, how has it been for you?
Thank you very much. It has been exciting, interesting, and I encourage any woman out there interested in science, maths, physics, that engineering is the industry to join.
If you could just tell me, accredited or rather certified engineers, especially women engineers, only make up for 9% of the total number, which is 2,500. Why do you think this number is so low?
We in IEK are at 12.7%, and we have made a commitment as the Vice Chair of the Women Engineers Committee that by 2024, the number would have doubled from what we have, so that our goal is to get to the 30% threshold. We are working on it. Thank you.
You've spoken about a 30% threshold, especially for the next 10 years. Why not 50-50? Don't you think women deserve to have half of the cake?
Kidogo kidogo hujaza kibaba. You have to start from somewhere. Out there, the young girls take it that science is difficult. So we have a mentorship board that is looking at that. As IEK, the Institution of Engineers of Kenya, we actually go to schools and talk to the girl child to encourage them. We are their role models. We tell them we have made it. We are the reflection of what they should be. So we are working on it. It is not easy, but I want to believe with the support of everyone, including you, we can make it.
Thank you very much. And speaking of role models, women engineers, there are also young women engineers. And if you could just get the perspective of the WEC chair, if you could just tell us, knowing that you're a woman in this sector, knowing that you're a leader in this sector, what are some of the things or agendas that you're trying to push so that you can reach that 50-50 mark?
Thank you very much. I'm very excited. This year we are holding our 5th Women Engineers Summit, and the theme for this year is 360 degrees, Women Engineers Catalyst for Change. And really what we want is to encourage the senior engineers and the more experienced engineers to mentor the younger engineers, because as you've clearly said, we are underrepresented. The percentage of women engineers as compared to men engineers is about 12.7% as per IK records, and we want to conduct more mentorship programs. We want to encourage the younger engineers to get registered. We want to share opportunities with them. We want to network with them and really be able to grow the numbers for women engineering in the country.
Next year, beginning of next year is going to be one of the days. In the beginning of next year is going to be the National Engineers Day, and they've said that there's going to be a special feature of women during this time. If you could just maybe tell us, how will that be?
Okay, during this day we are going to have a special event where we are going to have some networking sessions for women engineers, both young and old, to just come together and see how we can progress these numbers, how we can grow the numbers of the women engineers in Kenya to at least, our target is by 2024 to attain 30%, and probably in the long term, half, 50%.
Thank you so much. And that is the women's perspective. However, you must realize that in order to get gender balance, we must also get the men's perspective, especially in engineering. Sir, if you could just come closer, tell us, women. We're talking about how we're going to be empowering them. How about the men? What are some of the agendas that you guys are pushing?
Absolutely. So this year, IEK is holding the first men's summit. Previously, we have only had women's summit. But the conversation today is around the health, especially mental health for engineers, men engineers for that matter. We have gone through a wonderful session on stress management, on how to cope, and effectively play our role as leaders, discharge our responsibility as workers, as family men, and stuff like that. So that's kind of conversation that is looking at the mental health and the well-being of the man.
And of course, it's not necessarily a gender war. Maybe if you could tell us at the end of this convention, as a man in the engineering sector, what do you personally stand to benefit, and what exactly are you going to be pushing for?
Absolutely. There's so much to benefit from. When we attend this convention, engineers who are licensed and professional and consulting engineers, they gain 25 CPD points. But most importantly, our theme this year is looking at the climate change, sustainable engineering in the era of climate change. So we're having great conversations on how to integrate sustainability, resilience in our design solutions that we provide as engineers. So that's the kind of a thing we're looking at. And we have wonderful panel sessions, exhibitions, paper presenters, and we're having very great conversation looking at the sustainable development goals. And most importantly, as COP27 ended just the other day, we are looking at practical ways on actualizing sustainable development and just providing solutions that are, looking at reducing carbon emissions, enhancing carbon sinks, and generally managing the climate more responsibly.
Thank you very much, Engineer Kiteme. And as the day progresses, and of course as the week progresses, we will have more on this. As you surely know, the engineering conference will be running all the way until Thursday. And of course, the matters that are going to be discussed, JJ, are going to impact this country, considering that there are a lot of construction mishaps. And of course, professionals need to be consulted in these matters. But for now, back to you in studio, JJ.
Thank you very much. Hip back for a fantastic job back in Mombasa. We'll be getting back to you later. When we come back, we'll be picking up on the conversation, particularly on climate change. But then again, fuse it with a conversation on GMOs. Very important conversation. You've seen members of parliament taking a very cautionary stance. Let's hear from scientists. We'll be back in a minute.
Hi, my name is Mr. Otieno. Na ukumbuke FIFA World Cup 2022 iko hapa here in KBC na kuhitaji. Karibu.
Kupata kumpenda mtu kama sikiza tune kwenye simu yako, bonyeza *812 *501#.
Mapenzi si kumpenda mtu kwa kuwa amekamilika, kwani nawe pia una mapungufu yako. Kwa hivyo mapenzi ni kumpenda mtu na mapungufu yake.
Kupata kumpenda mtu, bonyeza *812 *501#. *812 *501#.
All right, welcome back. You're watching News Check. Let's just get right into the conversation on GMO. Earlier this morning, my colleague Victor Law hosted Dr. Joel Ochieng, the head of agricultural biotechnology at the University of Nairobi. Obviously, the conversation being pro-GMO. I have another scientist on set. This one is anti or also cautious about GMO, and that is Daniel Wanjoke, the lead expert in terms of environmental conservation. And we'll just dive right in. Let's talk about GMO because this is the heat or the topic that is generating a lot of heat in the country. But much of it comes from concerns from Kenyans on whether GMO is healthy to eat. That's the first concern, is it?
Thank you. The question, thank you, JJ, for inviting me for this talk. It is quite an interesting one. And the interesting part of the discussion on GMO, there are two levels. Whether it is safe as a food. If you talk about the starch, the ugari from GMO, there might be no big difference between your normal ugari and the GMO ugari. There's literally almost no difference until you start investigating what has been added.
Okay.
Or for you to protect your maize in the farm from worms and other pests, you require to put in a toxin. A toxin is something like poison, which kills worms, or those armyworms, the one that are known to attack maize. So for you to kill this worm, you are being required to change the genetics of the maize. Yet you could have killed the worm physically using normal pyrethrum.
Yeah.
Pyrethrin is...
We use pesticides to deal with worms.
Yes.
For GMO now, you have to change the genetical modification.
So that you could now alter the taste of and the food of that maize to the worm, so that it doesn't grow. That's the kind of modification we don't really require, because if I could grow the bacteria, because we know Bt, Bacillus thuringiensis, is a common bacteria in the soil anywhere. I can grow it in my farm. I am a bacteria farmer, so I can talk with authority on this. Yeah. Why don't we grow Bt, that is Bacillus thuringiensis, make a pesticide that we can apply on our farms? It is this laziness of us looking at a farm, only one person can operate that 100, 200 acre farm, where when you plant the seeds, you can go sit pretty until the harvest time. So you don't need weeding, you don't need spraying, you don't need any other crop husbandry. You just move in, you introduce maize, and that is the end of it. For a country like Kenya, where we have plenty of labor force, a lot of youths are jobless. Why do you want to use a chemical in the genetic of the maize to protect the crop instead of you actually doing a physical control of the pesticides, doing control of weeds? Like I keep on saying that every one of us was born to be a part of the food chain in your village. You may be in Nairobi, but your village requires you. At least once in a year, you go there and help them in the food production process. That way, we ensure we don't have to turn our parents into chemical farmers. Because chemical farming is coming in to bridge the gap of lack of labor force. I can tell you, the youths working in Nairobi would do better somewhere in Nyandarua helping the farmers in food production. But we are now here in town trying to look for white-collar jobs, while the village, the country cannot feed itself. That's why GMO maize does not fill a gap here in Africa that we should be filling. I know in Europe, in America, where much of the labor in the past has not been very easy to get, it's difficult to pay a farm hand in America. So they have actually moved to chemical farming, loud up, the one that you use for weed killing. GMO is coming to fill that gap. But here in Africa, we don't have.
Listening to you, because the conversation is really on the health of these GMOs. If we were modifying it in that sense, then you're simply saying as a scientist then, GMO food is not healthy.
GMO food is not healthy, and in the past we have been encouraged to encompass or to embrace GMO because it was used on cotton. You are told, oh no, don't worry, it's only affecting the suit you are wearing could be made of GMO cotton. So we relaxed. What we forget is that other than the cotton in a cotton plant, we also consume cotton oil. We also have cotton seed cake that could end up in fed to animals, could end up in our food chain. So you are not safe just by saying that, oh, it's only being fed to animals. The aspect of introducing a new chemical in the environment that your genetics and my genetics is not able to handle, your digestive system is not able to handle, that is the problem. And nobody can tell you conclusively, including the scientists, what will be the consequence of having that chemical becoming the only source of food in the whole food chain. If we didn't have maize, we only had GMO maize, we didn't have the normal maize, what will we have lost? Will we have lost the opportunity of our future generations to benefit from wholesome food? What if we determine that the GMO molecule, the genetically modified chemical that is put in the food, was not safe for us? I remember telling about starch, which is just a normal molecule. But the alteration of a starch molecule from one that coils clockwise to one that coils anti-clockwise actually determines whether you are able to eat that food or not. So a genetic modification, even in natural, because that's a natural modification in the starch molecule, resulting in you completely being unable to access that food. Then it's at that level where we are listening. If it is possible to actually change the food chain, lose half of your food availability from maize or starch, from your ugari, just because you can't digest a certain starch in that ugari. It means that if we have manually or mechanically introduced a new gene that changes the structure of the starch, we might lose our ability to digest that food. And that is what we are saying. A precautionary principle requires that we avoid it if we don't have enough evidence to back it up. And nobody has any evidence.
But listening to the members of parliament who were here, and I'm sure you caught a glimpse of what they were saying, taking a very cautionary approach towards the conversation on GMO, because you're caught up in a catch-22 situation. The two members of parliament are from Northeastern, where the drought situation is really serious and people suffering under the bane of drought. And you have a solution here in terms of GMO, even if proven with some of the complications you're talking about in terms of health. And one wonders, shouldn't then we say that GMO is a stopgap measure?
It is indeed a stopgap measure. It is, if someone is starving, even if you are from Northeastern and you are at the point of death, and someone offered you pork, you may forget that it is against the religion to take pork. But you may want to survive the night, and tomorrow you go back to your normal food. So this GMO, we are not opposing the 10 million metric tons or whatever they are going to be brought in for us to survive through this drought season. I would be the last person to advocate for no food unless there's non-GMO. The GMO food is okay for that now, for our to maintain our population in a condition that they are able to survive until next season when they can harvest their own food. But my opposition is actually very, not even based on nutrition or our way of feeding, but in our environmental approach to how we maintain the ecosystem, what we introduce into our environment, and what is good for us. What may be good for us now, we can eat the ugari, GMO ugari. It won't kill all of us. Like someone said, there are so many other reasons for dying. But after we are done with this drought, let's move to a situation where we can say, we sanitize our food chain. We say our food will not be containing GMO unless it's an emergency. Then we can also say we should embrace technologies that are more suitable for production of food in our part of the world, other than GMO. Because when I think about the argument for GMO, it's that it's quick to produce food, you can do more food, but nobody has even experimented with irrigation here in Africa. We have not actually done irrigation to improve our food production. We have seen Mwea in Kirinyaga suffering from lack of food, lack of water to irrigate their land. How can that happen in a country where we have an irrigation board? So we are very far from moving to GMO as a solution to our food security.
Let me listen to one of the proponents of GMO food and take you back just a bit. Dr. Joel Ochen joins us once more on KBC. The question is GMO food healthy?
I will talk about the GM food that we have made in Kenya.
The one you've made in Kenya?
That's the one we have tested.
Okay.
There are obviously, what we have is that we have reciprocal regulatory regimes across the world. If a vehicle is inspected in Japan, it will be acceptable in Kenya. They don't have to inspect again. But I think because we have a heated debate and we have issues that concern human health, it's better to talk about what we have tested. More than what has been tested competently as well, but it's being brought from outside. Now, what we have tested here is BT maize. We have tested it in the labs when being prepared. We have tested it in confined field trials. We have tested it in national performance trials. We have tested it all safety tests by the developers ourselves. And then there is another testing done by none of the regulators. National Biosafety Authority, EFIS, and the others also do their own independent testing. And it has been approved to be safe. And in fact, if you leave Kenya alone, there is nowhere anywhere in the world where anybody living today or in the past has raised any issue with BT maize. The only issue that people have raised, and whether they're legitimate or not is another matter, is on Roundup tolerant maize, which we don't have here and which nobody's going to import. Yes.
Quite an interesting one, because Wanjoki, I don't know whether you're convinced on the aspect of BT maize, because he says he's not talking about all GMOs, he's talking about what they have tested here, and BT maize is good for your health.
For him to test any material in the environment in his lifetime, he cannot actually say that it's good enough.
Okay.
If I'm assuming he's 50 years, like I am, he could have started testing at 40 and has only lived with the product for 10 years. That's not enough. That's not enough to say that this product is safe. But what we look at, I'm an environmentalist, not an agriculturist. The agronomy has its own input in terms of making life better for all of us. It's that my colleague here would rather use a genetic modification to manage a physical insect pest, the one that is causing, which I find very, very lazy. Let me use that one. Not him, but the way of thinking is lazy. And I look in this gallery, we have a lot of youths here. They should be part of our labor force, our food production labor force. He is eliminating human intervention in food production by introducing BT. We are being left with 5 million jobless youths who would actually be weeding his farm, keeping the crop, doing a crop husbandry.
Isn't farming about less cost of production and more yields then?
It can't be. If you do that, and that's where he is now. He only wants to plant, and every other insect that come from neighboring farms, when it lands in his chamber, they're either dead or they just repaired. So he's protecting his crop by injecting a genetic composition that resists other insects. So it's not the best way to approach it. I would, at the BT bacillus thing, I deal with a sister bacteria, and you've seen what I do. I would rather you used BT and sprayed it on our crops. That way we would spray to all of our crops, whether it is beans, maize, or whatever. That we are going to introduce the bacteria into the genetics. That's where the issue comes in,
All right.
the moral issue. And I gave you, before we went on here, I will give you a good example. God allowed a horse and a donkey to breed. It's possible to breed. But what does that, what do we get? A mule. It could be good for you as a farmer who has done the breeding, because for the entire life of that animal, it will never breed. It will always be working for you. But he ensures that it does not, God ensures that it does never reproduce.
All right. Let me hold
That's
that
why GMO is.
Hold that up, because Dr. Joel Ocheng, I'm even seeing questions streaming in, because it appears like Kenyans have already decided where they want to go, some of them obviously, in terms of GMO. But let's respond to what Daniel has said, that you cannot claim to have a conclusive idea or a conclusive experiment that indeed BT maize is healthy.
Yes, the first issue is that we are born in this world and we eat so many things. Some of them cause allergies, others are okay. Now, if you are testing for any product, whether BT or not, first of all, there is meat inspection that is done on goats, on mutton, on beef, and all the acceptable domestic animals that we slaughter. They are inspected every morning. Even right now as we talk, there is an inspection going on at Dagoretti Corner, slaughterhouse. Does it mean that people died yesterday of meat? It's because their role is to assure safety of Kenyans. That testing is done to assure safety, and is done on an animal within 5 minutes, for your information. They test an animal for 5 minutes. That is depending on how detailed the test is. And usually it's as brief as 1 minute if you ask any meat inspector.
True.
The issue is that which gene are we using? We are using a gene from a harmless soil bacterium that he says very well he uses. Bacillus thuringiensis is saying he's using a sister bacterium. BT is a harmless bacterium. And that was what informed the use of that particular one. Because if you use something else that has no history of safe use, then you'll go back to testing for longer than your own life. Now, if I take beans and I want to add proteins into maize using beans, how much testing do I need? Almost nothing, because I've been eating beans anyway, and that's no problem. So I'm only testing the incorporation, whether the incorporation itself introduces anything new. If it introduces nothing new, I'm safe.
And which you discover it does introduce anything new.
We test this thing in an extensive manner before a product is put in the market. The regulatory systems are very stringent, more than anything else being tested on Earth, GMO.
Okay.
So now, the issue is BT is saying we rather use it to spray. We want to protect our environment. When you spray too much chemicals into the soil, you get pesticide load into the environment. And that becomes dangerous because it gets into the water bodies. That's why we decided to incorporate the gene instead into the maize plant for two reasons. One, protect the environment from load of insecticides. Two, protect the crop from pests that open up the way for fungal infection, which brings aflatoxin, which is a food safety issue. And three, now the farmer has to buy the BT pesticide to spray. So this is why we said spraying is not good. They are campaigning for organic. I thought so.
Yeah, campaigning for organic.
Yes, so they should embrace this more because there's no spraying.
All right. Let me ask you a quick one here. There's a question that came from one of our viewers very quickly. If I can just get my question. Maize is basically carbohydrates. Is GMO maize something else? Does the chemical composition of carbohydrates change in the GMO maize?
No, it doesn't. When we test several things. We test nutritional component, we test agronomic components, and the maize, the GM maize and the ordinary maize is exactly the same agronomically and nutritionally. Test other nutritional components like the biochemical components, the biochemistry of that maize is exactly the same. That's why it has to be labeled for consumers to choose. Because other than labeling, there's no other way other than in a laboratory that you can tell this is GM maize. You can't tell.
You can't tell.
There is no way.
You know, before I come to you, Wanjoki, Dr. Joel, I want to understand. Because this fears about the health of, GMOs, that consuming GMOs is not healthy. And coming from science experts also opposed to this, just like you're a science expert supporting GMO. It cannot be unfounded.
Well,
it just can't be unfounded.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
You're talking about the publication that led to the ban. Now, that publication, first of all, used rats. Of course, rats are very close to humans. That's why we use them as organisms. But there was a serious error. He used rats that are predisposed to develop tumors, whether they are fed on GM or not, whether they are fed on anything or not. That's one. And two, the same author has republished another one saying he has now found out that contaminants in the feed that he had used was responsible for the tumors he observed. People are ignoring that. And in his own English word, and I can bring you the paper in the next 5 minutes when I leave here, because I have it in my car, is that he said in his language, which is English, simple one, that the tumors were emanating from the herbicide, glyphosate herbicide, the one we call Roundup, not the GM maize itself. Very clear sentence. But because this is now sold by the multinationals, you can't touch. Now they come and touch ours that we're developing. Because, I mean, this is...
I want to come back to you. First of all, there's that issue that has been raised when you talk about BT spray. And indeed, as an environmental scientist, I would assume that too much chemicals in the air is harmful to human beings. So spraying again gets ruled out. But there's also the question of, you think it is lazy. Dr. Joel thinks it is evolution of technology. That's where we are headed. You think the kind of farming of GMOs is lazy, so much that we have so many other choices. What are these choices that we have?
I would like, first of all, to mention that his assertion that the food is safe is not correct. That there is no alteration in the starch we interact with. But I am personally very allergic to mutton. If I took mutton here in the next 15 minutes, I'll be sick. That means I have to, every day, beside the meat inspection at Dagoretti Slaughterhouse, I personally must inspect and make sure that the animal I'm eating has a goat tail. That I have to do myself. And that's where, when you come to GMO, I should be able to choose whether I am eating mutton or goat. Because for me to eat mutton, it is actually a medical crisis. The other aspect is, you can't say that there is no change in the structure or the composition of the starch in the maize. I give you an example. Several million years ago, the starch in the maize you eat, the ugari you eat, there was a mutation, such that we have the L-glucose and the D-glucose. He knows about that. If you put a pure composition of the L-glucose and you pass right through it, it deflects right to the left. If you do with the D-glucose, it deflects to the other side. It therefore means that those two glucose are different. Structurally, molecular-wise, if you weigh them, they are the same. But the way it coils, the way that starch coils, is such that your enzymes will never unravel it. And that's why even when you eat a big chunk of ugari, half of that goes to the toilet. Because your body is not able to, your enzymes are not able to digest that starch, which has coiled with the head in and the tail out. So he has not had enough time to unravel the starch made from the BT maize.
Is this a matter of 2 minutes, 5 minutes?
No, it is not.
Okay.
Even what I'm talking about here is not in books. But we still get maize from Ukraine, we eat, we go to the toilet, and we manage the waste after that. Nobody has told you this, that half of your packet of ugari doesn't get digested just because there was a genetic modification. It might have been done by the dinosaurs, even the dinosaurs were scientists, to change it, and we may be suffering the consequence. We don't want you people to be the one to change the structure of our maize such that our great-great-grandchildren discover, oh, we are never able to access some of the starch in our maize because it has a BT and egg protein, which makes it impossible for me to digest it. That's what the precautionary principle we are working with. Let's work with mechanical removal of weeds, because GMO is good for us. But what did we see the last 3 months? Zebras, gazelles, giraffes died in a national park. What is their place? If you do GM maize and you don't change anything about the climate change, what is their take? What benefit will they have? You will be having your stomach full, but the climate is going wild, and the droughts are all over. You will not have sorted the we call it ecosystem problem that is brought in by climate change.
Dr. Joel's response to that, because Wanjoka is concerned other than just the health aspect, which he says you cannot prove that indeed GMO is healthy. It's also the concern of the ecosystem. We're not just dealing with human beings here.
Yes.
Yeah.
And now, the first thing, I think we are also mixing up issues here. Let's not use the word GMO. Let's use specific names. I'm talking about BT maize.
BT maize.
And with BT maize, there's no spraying, there's no herbicide. Herbicides are used for weeding. In Kenyan system, the smallholders have very tiny piece of land. You don't need herbicides. So you don't need herbicide-tolerant maize variety. That's why we have the BT maize here. That is used for thousands of hectares in America, not here. So first, you should understand we're talking about BT maize. And second, is that as much as we cannot test for more than 200 years, some things are clear to know. I have done 3D structure of proteins and published that 2 months ago. 3-dimensional structure of proteins. And what causes allergy. It's published in the journal called Gene, which you can check at your free time. You can check even now. So I understand how allergy is caused very deeply, and I might help you in your situation. So the BT incorporation into the maize genome does not confer any nutritional change at all.
None at all?
None.
Okay.
I mean, even the regulators, you should believe, they test also. The developers test it, then the regulators take over. And they test the same things. And by the time they're certifying any crop to be safe and any product to be safe to be put on the market shelves, I'm sure you should believe it.
All right. One of the concerns they have is obviously the capacity for us. You're talking about BT maize. First of all, can you confirm to Kenyans that this technology is ours?
Now, the BT maize technology is a public-private partnership.
Okay.
There is no private company that owns it that will come back to you and say, you pay me royalty because you have used my gene.
So who owns it?
It's a PPP, public-private partnership. In other words, the government of Kenya,
Kenyan government?
The government of Kenya, the private sector, and the research groups. It's a partnership. It's not, GMO cannot be developed by an individual or just a single institution. No. It's one of the things that brings people together.
There's a point you said there was a mix-up of issues when you're talking about GMOs. But of course, I know your bias is towards the BT maize.
And which is locally available.
And which is locally available.
Yes.
But the ban lifted by government was on GMOs.
Yes, and I can explain that. What's happening is this. There is no ban that was lifted. I think that's something I wanted to clarify today.
Okay.
President Uhuru Kenyatta authorized the local cultivation of BT cotton, which is 60% food and feed, and only 40% lint. Lint is what you use in making clothes. Then, in this year, 2022, July, the Treasury CS gazetted importation of GM maize specifically. Specifically maize, not anything else. Now, when people talk about President Ruto lifting the ban, Ruto did not lift the ban. What Ruto did was to make it open so that people know you can now import. There's nothing opaque. Because in the other case, you could apply, then they told, no, there's a ban. The other guy applies, it's allowed. So now, open playing ground is what Ruto has done. Open governance system, where now people know their fate. I know it's now legal, I can import.
All right.
And if you deny me, I want to know why.
Wanjoka, part of the accusation that faces the proponents of GMO is the fear that there is a silent monopolization of seed supply. And I'm talking about GMO now, not just the BT maize, because that's a conversation we'll have in future about GMO maize, that there is a silent plot to monopolize the supply of seeds. And what that does eventually, again, is compromise the food security of a country.
That is true. When he gives me his BT maize, can I call it BT maize or GMO?
BT maize.
BT maize.
Yes.
He comes to ensure that my crop is thriving, isn't it? That my crop is thriving, and he has the right to come and eliminate some of the spots. These are crops that grow out of the expectation. He'll pluck them out. It's true or false?
Why?
He'll pluck them out because he will say, this is not what I expected from my seed. He is also going to influence what I do with that seed. I cannot give it to my neighbor. Okay. And if I want to even tithe it in my local church, like I say,
you can.
He has an influence on what I do with that maize. True or false?
No, I think you're mixing up issues. There's Seed Variety Act, which was put in place in 2016.
Yeah,
it covers all seeds, not GM seeds. All seeds. If that's what you're referring to, can you tell Kenyans you're talking about seeds as a whole, not GM seeds?
No. When I buy the variety,
maize was
Duma
an example.
614 variety, I planted.
Yes.
The Kenya Seed Company doesn't care what I do with that crop. But I'm in possession of a contract. I have a farm, a big farm. I would like to do maize. But the people have offered to offer me seeds, want to dictate the kind of how I treat even the crops in my farm. They even talk about destruction of a male seed from the farm, and that it cannot be fed to animals. That's a kind of control we fear from the multinationals that are bringing us the option of seed, GMO maize or BT maize, and that is the loss of food security for us, because in the past I kept part of my seeds from the previous crop and I could plant them again. Yeah. I could give it to my neighbors, but with the GMO,
the controls.
Yeah, the control. It actually takes away that right to even share seeds among farmers. That's true. It also eliminates the possibility of me carrying over the seed to the next year.
All right. Let me cut you short because we are almost nearing winding up, and respond to that, because what he's saying is not far-fetched. There's something happening in Narok where a person doing the farming of the maize you're talking about, the next neighbor cannot plant different maize because they are accused of compromising
the genetic material.
This other maize. Have you heard that?
No. I've not heard of that because, first of all, before you even talk, we have not commercially released BT maize.
Okay.
Not yet. It's still under KFI's.
Is it the only one being farmed in Kenya?
There's no other maize in Kenya that is being farmed as we talk today.
You can confirm that?
There's none.
All right.
Akuna. The one that you're talking about, there are two varieties of BT maize now, and they are all under KFI's being given variety name before being commercialized. So in people's farms, there is no BT maize at all. So the Narok case is a strange one, and they should tell us where they got it from.
There's no BT maize commercialized in Kenya?
No, there's none.
Quite an interesting one, because the conversation that is coming from the ends of Narok is something different in terms of...
I think they're talking about hybrid.
Yeah?
Hybrid maize, maybe.
Hybrid?
Maybe they're talking about hybrid. You know, people say anything they want to say. They should tell us, can you contact NBA and ask them whether they have released any for commercial release? There's none.
You're confirming there's no variety whatsoever?
No, there's none.
Other than, there's BT maize, the one that you said is a PPP.
Yes.
There's no other variety of GMO in Kenya?
No, there's none.
Okay.
Quite interesting.
If he knows one, let him tell us.
What we could say, the Swahili say that ukiona kichwa cha mwenzako kinyelewa, chako kitirie maji. If the controls on hybrid are so strict, how about when I am the only one producing this seed? Because hybrid could be different from different companies. What about when there's only one company producing the GMO maize, his company, and he is the only one who has the key to our lack of it, of drought in the country. If you are the only one controlling the possibility of food shortage in the country, then the rules would be very strict. And it is what we are saying. We don't want to lose that ability to decide what to grow and when to grow it, and what to do with the produce from our farms. That is what we are saying. Maybe BT maize may be good, but are there other options? What has changed? We should be changing a climate that is forcing him to do BT maize. We should be restoring back our environment.
Restoring back the climate.
So that crops that our grandmothers grew could still be doing, cassava, sorghum and stuff.
All right, a very quick one. I know you need to respond on the controls, yes.
Yes, I think we need to separate myths from reality. It was clear and made clear by the government that the BT maize will be distributed by the Kenya Seed Company, which is a national institution from which we have been buying other seeds like hybrid seeds for a long time. I wonder why this becomes difficult if it is BT maize, for example, under the same regime. What exactly is the issue? And in fact, once you buy
so you're
seeds,
confirming there are controls?
Controls are very stringent, they're there. Because you'll come and say, my neighbor planted BT maize and he didn't give a buffer zone. So there are controls in place. There is what we call environmental release regulations, which are followed to the letter. And those controls, you can make a choice whether to plant BT maize or whether to plant the other normal maize. There's nobody who can force you.
The environmental lease, the one that you're talking about, the environmental lease, does it affect the other person near you?
No, the issue is, there is a the Seed Variety Act, which was put in place a few years ago. It talks about all seeds, not BT,
not just BT,
not GMO, not BT.
Okay.
So if we are not happy with that law, we have to change that law. It doesn't cover GMO; it covers seeds.
Okay.
So let nobody use that opportunity to demonize GM seeds only.
I think I should have both of you here next week or the day after, because it's quite an interesting conversation, so that we deal with the facts on your end, the facts on the other end. Dr. Joel Ocheng is the head of agricultural biotechnology at the University of Nairobi, APRO GMO. And then Daniel Wanjoki is the lead expert on environmental conservation, the CEO EcoSave Africa, and GMO, and clearly, as you can tell, they're both scientists, but still can't agree on whether we go GMO or not. But this is where we have to put a cap on News Check this afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us. Up next is Gladys Mungai with Tamrini and Kurunzi Mashinani. Don't go too far. Have yourself a fantastic afternoon.
I want to show them my attitude. Ya bwana, ni chuo kikuu cha burudani, mashavu.
Nyumbani kaumbea.
Burudani.
Twende tukacheze bango. Mama it takes two to tango.
Na interview kali kutoka Pwani.
Na ukitaka tuiwashe leo.
Bwana, kila siku ya Friday ama Ijumaa ukipenda saa 3 hadi saa 6 kamili.
Fanya kama unacheza isoko.
Kumbuka hashtag Masha. Nyumbani kwa burudani. Usikose tegea show kali tokea pande za Pwani.
I realized that I had talent in acting when I was 3 years old. My mother took me to an audition at KBC and I was selected for a role. But it looks like a dog.
Yes, it does.
The auditions were interesting and fun. I was excited when I was given a role in Strange.
Yes. Good. I'm going to make us an omelette for breakfast, okay?
The story of Aladdin. Well, if you've never heard about it, here is your chance to do so. And if you heard about it before, well, it doesn't hurt hearing about it. another time.
Hey guys, welcome back to Tammy's Kitchen. I'm going to show you guys how to make the yummiest shortbread cookies at the comfort of your home.
I'm going to teach you how to make a fan doll. And for that, we need different colored papers.